There are two types of secrets in a world like ours, the ones we bury and the ones that bury us. Today, we were burying a king, but the most dangerous secret wasn't going into the ground. She was standing by the grave, dressed in black, her tears a perfect, convincing performance. She was my father's third wife. Lysander Blackwood was buried on a Tuesday, under a sky as gray as the marble of his own mausoleum. He was a colossus, a man who built an empire on ambition and cold calculation, and his son, Kevin, stood by the gaping hole in the earth not with grief, but with a numb, weary relief. The 28-year war of attrition between father and son was finally over. Kevin believed the worst was behind him, the constant criticism, the belittlement of his art, the crushing weight of an expectation he could never meet. He thought he was free. But for a man like Lysander Blackwood, death was not an end. It was merely a change of strategy. The final, most brutal move in their lifelong game was not delivered in a hospital room, but in the sterile silence of a lawyer's office, hidden within the pages of a last will and testament. It was a clause, a single, monstrous sentence that would tear Kevin's world apart and chain him to a ghost. The air in the Blackwood Manor's grand library was thick with the scent of old money and older secrets. It was a room designed for intimidation, floor-to-ceiling shelves groaning with books that had likely never been read, their leather spines a uniform, oppressive brown. Kevin stood by the window, watching the last of the funeral guests' cars slink away down the rain-slicked drive. He felt hollowed out, a shell of a man. The black Armani suit he wore felt like a costume. Across the room sat the players in this final, posthumous drama. His stepmother, Veronica, a woman whose elegance was as sharp and cold as a surgical blade. She had been Lysander's second wife, a socialite merger of sorts, and her grief seemed to be expressed solely through the impeccable black Chanel suit she wore. And then there was her, Serafina, Lysander's third and final bride. At 25, she was a stark contrast to everything in the room. Where everything was dark wood and heavy fabric, she was light and grace. She wore a simple, black dress, no jewelry, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Kevin had barely exchanged a dozen words with her in the 6 months since his father, in a move that shocked society, had brought the young, enigmatic art historian home. He'd viewed her as he viewed all his father's possessions, beautiful, cold, and utterly foreign to him. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Alastair, who seemed to have been born with a permanent nervous tremor, cleared his throat. The reading began. It was a dry recitation of power and assets, holding companies, offshore accounts, estates in Gstaad and the south of France. Kevin tuned it out, his mind drifting to the studio above the garage, to the half-finished canvas waiting for him, to Maya, his childhood friend, whose text of condolence had been the only thing that felt real all day. She'd known the real Lysander. She'd seen the bruises his words could leave. And to my son, Kevin, Mr. Alastair's voice cut through his thoughts, sharp and sudden. I bequeath my entire estate, all holdings, stocks, and properties on one condition. The room went still. Kevin turned from the window, his heart beginning a slow, heavy thud against his ribs. Veronica leaned forward, a predator sensing a shift in the wind. He must marry my wife, Serafina, within 3 months of my passing. The words hung in the air, nonsensical. Kevin actually let out a short, disbelieving laugh. It was a joke, a bad, cruel, posthumous joke. Mr. Alastair, pale and sweating, continued, his voice barely a whisper. Should he refuse, or should the marriage not occur, the entire estate will be transferred to a corporate trust, overseen by the board, and Kevin will be left with nothing. Not the house, not the shares, not even the contents of his own studio. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Kevin's eyes snapped to Serafina. For a fraction of a second, he saw it, a flicker of pure, unadulterated horror in her deep green eyes before her composure slammed back into place, her face becoming a beautiful, unreadable mask. Then he looked at Veronica, and on her face he saw no surprise, only a thin, vindictive smile. She had known. This was her victory. She would rather see the empire handed to a board of strangers, with her as the influential widow, than see it pass to the son who represented Lysander's first, and perhaps only, true love. You're insane, Kevin breathed, his voice cracking. He was insane, I'll contest this. Mr. Alastair gave a shaky, sympathetic shrug. Your father's legal team is formidable, Kevin. A contestation could take years, drain any resources you have access to now, and the likelihood of success is minimal. This clause, while unorthodox, is not technically illegal. Kevin felt the walls of the library, the entire manor, closing in on him. This was his father's masterpiece, the ultimate control. Force his son to marry his own widow, a woman he barely knew, to become a living monument to his father's whims. It was a gilded cage, and the door had just been locked from the outside. He looked at Serafina again, this woman who was now the key to his future, and felt a wave of revulsion so strong it nearly brought him to his knees. Who was she? A willing participant in this madness, or just another pawn in Lysander Blackwood's endless, bitter game? The weeks that followed were a study in slow-burning despair. Kevin's first instinct was defiance. He consulted lawyers, all of whom gave him the same grim prognosis as Mr. Alastair. The will was ironclad. He spent days raging, drinking his way through his father's prized wine cellar, tearing up preliminary divorce papers his own lawyers had drawn up as a hypothetical. He was trapped. The pressure was applied subtly but relentlessly. Veronica began overseeing the transition of power, making pointed comments about estate planning and liquidating non-essential assets. She mentioned his mother's childhood home, a modest but beautiful cottage by the sea that was Kevin's most cherished possession, a place untouched by his father's coldness. The board might see it as a sentimental liability, she'd said, her voice sweet as poison. Best to sell it now, don't you think? It was that threat that broke him. The idea of strangers tearing out the rose bushes his mother had planted, of painting over the colors she had chosen, was a violation he could not allow. In a moment of bleak desperation, he sought out Serafina. He found her not in the main house, but in the overgrown conservatory, a glass-domed relic his mother had loved. She was wearing simple jeans and a sweater, her hair in a loose braid. And she was carefully repotting a fragile orchid. The sight disarmed him. It was so normal, so human. We need to talk, he said, his voice rough from lack of sleep and too much whiskey. She didn't look up. If it's about the will, I have nothing to say. I have a proposition, he pressed on. A business arrangement. We get married, we secure the inheritance. We live separate lives under this same cursed roof. After a respectable period, a year, maybe two, we file for an amicable divorce. You walk away with a generational fortune, a settlement that would make a sultan blush. And I get my freedom, and my mother's house. Finally, she set down her trowel and looked at him. Her gaze was direct, intelligent, and held a deep, old sadness that took him aback. And what makes you think I want a settlement? She asked, her voice soft but firm. What makes you think I want to be bargained with and then thrown away again? The again hung in the humid air between them, a fragment of a story he knew nothing about, but he was too desperate to care. What other choice do we have? He implored. Let my father win from beyond the grave. Let Veronica pick this carcass clean. There was a long silence, filled only with the drip of water from a leaky pipe. No, she said finally, a weary resignation in her tone. I suppose we don't. The wedding was a bleak, transactional affair at the city courthouse. Veronica was their witness, her smile a razor blade. Mr. Alastair handled the paperwork. Kevin wore the same suit from the funeral. Serafina wore a simple cream-colored dress that was a far cry from a wedding gown. They spoke their vows like actors in a bad play, their voices flat and empty. The judge pronounced them man and wife. There was no kiss. Life in the manor became a carefully choreographed dance of avoidance. Kevin took the east wing, Serafina the west. They ate meals in silence, the clink of silverware against fine china the only conversation. Kevin threw himself into his painting, creating dark, chaotic abstracts that reflected the turmoil in his soul. He avoided Maya, too ashamed to explain the twisted reality of his marriage. But the immense, silent house forced a strange intimacy upon them. He'd come across her in the library, reading a dense volume of philosophy, not the gossip magazines he'd expected. He'd hear her late at night, playing complex, sorrowful pieces by Chopin on the grand piano in the music room. The music would drift through the halls, a ghostly serenade that spoke of a pain he recognized. One night, a violent storm knocked out the power. The sprawling manor was plunged into an oppressive darkness. Kevin, seeking a candle, found Serafina in the main drawing room, already lighting a fire in the massive hearth. They were prisoners of the weather, forced into proximity. "He wasn't always a monster, you know," she said quietly, staring into the flames. Her voice was different without the electric hum of the house surrounding it, softer, more real. "Could have fooled me," Kevin replied, leaning against the mantelpiece. There was a deep sadness in him, a wound that never healed. "From your mother, I think." Kevin stiffened. "Don't talk about my mother." "Why? Because it's easier to remember him as a pure villain," she challenged, turning her gaze to him. The firelight danced in her eyes, making them look like liquid emerald. "People aren't born as monsters, Kevin. They are carved by loss. He loved her. Her death, it broke something in him that could never be fixed." Her words unsettled him. They didn't fit the narrative he'd built his life upon. They talked for hours as the storm raged outside. She spoke of her own life, growing up in the state system, the foster homes, the constant struggle for security. She spoke of art, of its power to heal and to remember. She was sharp, witty, and perceptive. She saw the world in a way he'd never encountered, and he found himself, against all odds, captivated. The professional boundary of their pact began to feel as thin and fragile as glass. He started seeing her not as his father's bride, but as Serafina. A woman. A beautiful, intelligent, intriguing woman. And the cage, for the first time, felt a little less constricting. A few days later, Maya visited his studio. She took in the new paintings, the less angry, more nuanced works, and her eyes fell on one in particular, a portrait, cleverly disguised as a mythological figure, but with Serafina's eyes, Serafina's mouth. "You're falling for her, aren't you?" Maya asked, her voice quiet and sad. Kevin couldn't meet her gaze. "It's not like that, it's complicated." "Be careful, Kevin," Maya warned, her concern etched on her face. "You're playing a game your father designed. Every move, every feeling, he probably anticipated it. Don't forget who built the board." Her words were a splash of cold water. After she left, a restless paranoia took hold of him. He went to his father's old study, a room he'd avoided since the funeral. He began rifling through the desk, looking for, he didn't know what, a clue, a reason. In a locked drawer, forced open with a letter opener, he found a simple, leather-bound journal. It wasn't a business ledger. It was personal. His hands trembled as he flipped to the last entry, dated just a week before Lysander's death. The handwriting, usually so controlled, was frantic, scrawled. "I have made a catastrophic error, a miscalculation of monumental proportions. She is not who I thought. The past has claws, and they are at my throat. If anything happens to me, look to S." The journal's warning became a poison in Kevin's veins. She is not who I thought. The woman he was dangerously close to loving was a stranger. A predator, perhaps. He hired an investigator. The report was a bomb. Serafina was Ania Petrova. Her mother, a journalist investigating Blackwood, died in a suspicious accident. Kevin was shocked. This wasn't a marriage of convenience. It was an assassination, and Kevin was her next target. Kevin, blinded, with the revelation, went to find Serafina. "Ania Petrova, did you marry him to kill him?" he asked. "You think this is about revenge? Oh, Kevin, you're so blind," she replied. "Then tell me, what was his catastrophic error?" "He found my birth certificate. He realized the truth. The woman he married was his daughter," she said. The air left the room. Kevin staggered back, the world crumbling. His wife, his sister, the horror was absolute. Veronica was at the doorway, holding a voice recorder. My, what a sordid little secret," she said. She stepped into the light, her face a mask of triumph. "A fraudulent marriage, a potential murder, and now this. The board will hand me everything. You're both finished," Veronica said. But Serafina didn't flinch. She walked to a hidden wall safe, retrieving a single document. "My mother was thorough, Veronica. This affidavit names you, Veronica, as the one who gave the order to silence her. Oh, I forgot to mention there is also solid evidence both here and elsewhere that you killed her. You leave now, resign, and never speak of this, or you'll spend your life in a real cage." Veronica's triumph shattered into pure terror. She was checkmated. Veronica vanished before dawn. The empire was Kevin's, but his victory was ash in his mouth. He stood in the grand hall with the woman who was his wife, his sister, his father's killer. He no longer knew what was true. The annulment was swift and cold. As Serafina packed her single suitcase, he finally asked the question burning in his soul. "My father's heart attack. Did you help it along?" Serafina stopped, her back to him. "I didn't need to. The shock of what I was, it was enough. But I didn't save him either. I watched him gasp and I felt nothing," she replied. Her confession was more chilling than any denial. She was both innocent and guilty, just like him. "Oh, the money you're giving me, it's not for me. It's for the clinic my mother was trying to save in that village your family poisoned. Some legacies are built on ruin. Others are built on cleaning it up." She turned, her gaze meeting his one last time. There was no love there, no hate, just a vast, empty understanding. "Goodbye, brother," she said. And she was gone. Kevin was left as the master of a haunted house, the heir to a fortune built on lies, and the brother of a woman he would never see again. He had the money, the power, the freedom he always wanted. But as he looked around the silent, gilded tomb his father built, he realized the most terrifying twist of all. The cage was never the will or the marriage or the secret. The cage was the name he now owned, and he was now the one who had to live inside it.